Scott just made
Go
the
back to
point.
Thomas
Jefferson
Jefferson, you'll
used to
read
be a
that.
lot more secure, not just. While ships and planes move into position and begin bombing in the Middle East, and the U.S. State Department scrambles to find reliable allies on the ground, another war has already begun, this one between the White House and the Pentagon. And it's going to be fought on the front pages of America's newspapers. I'm Steve Green, and this is a special three-part trifecta on the war between Obama and his generals. But I don't want to turn this into a week-long Obama-bashing contest. So in this first part, we'll look at today's fight, which is hardly the first of its kind in American history. In part two, we'll spend a little time analyzing the president in his commander-in-chief role. And in part three, we'll look at three other American wartime presidents, the good, the bad, and maybe a little bit of the ugly. So let's bring on Bill Whittle and Scott Ott right now for part one. Gentlemen, time and again over the last few days, I saw the same three words in the newspaper headlines: Obama versus generals. A news search returned 701 results from just this week using that, well, that kind of strange phrase. So first, we need to go back to 2010 when General Lloyd Austin warned the president that if he withdrew all of our troops from Iraq, the result would be chaos. Well, chaos resulted, as we all know. Mark Thiessen reported at the Washington Post last week that General Austin advised Obama that in taking on the Islamic State, quote, his best military advice was to send a modest contingent of American troops, principally Special Operations Forces, to advise and assist Iraqi army units in fighting the militants. Now, this advice was very publicly rejected by the president, resulting in a battle of the headlines that's been raging all week long. Now, Bill, every president has fought with his generals, usually in private, but sometimes very publicly, like, well, Truman and MacArthur is one good example. Now, in this instance, is it a sign of healthy debate in the executive branch, or does this look like something else to you?
Well, there's a lot to be said about this. Primarily, I think the first thing that entered my mind is we just have access to so much more information that we didn't have back in really any time prior to probably the 70s or 80s. You know, there were entire stories of huge state secrets that were kept by the press because they didn't want it released. So there was probably a lot more bickering behind the scenes that we are more privy to today. With that said, I think the reason we're seeing Obama versus the generals is because Obama has set a set of political objectives and then told the generals how to achieve those political objectives. And the generals are basically saying, we can do what you tell us to do, or we can achieve your political objectives, but we can't do both. And that's where we get into trouble. The ideal arrangement here should be that the civilian leadership, the President of the United States, should set a series of political objectives to be achieved and then turn that operational goal over to the military and leave them alone to do their jobs. So if Obama is saying, I want to defeat ISIS, and I don't want to put boots on the ground, then the generals have no recourse but to say, we can't defeat ISIS unless we put boots on the ground. Please pick one of these two options. It doesn't seem unreasonable or rebellious or treasonous or out of the chain of command or anything. It seems to me like the generals are just saying, Commander-in-Chief, which of these mutually exclusive courses would you like us to follow?
Or maybe he just wants to have it all. Now, over at antiwar.com, they report that Army Chief General Ray Ordinero has also gone public with his belief that ground troops are required in Iraq if Obama is serious about wanting to degrade and eventually destroy, those are the president's word, the Islamic State. Scott, putting aside whether you tend to agree with the generals or with the president on the policy, what are your thoughts on generals going behind the president's back to get in front of the cameras?
Well, this, you know, it's tough to say this when you have so little respect for our current commander-in-chief, but the reality is you don't want to have your generals going to the media and talking about what the nature of their discussions are with the president. Now, at what point does it get to be so bad that a patriotic military man has to stand up in public and say, we're being set up for absolute failure here, and I can't be a part of this? I think at that point is when you resign. I think you have to resign your commission at that point, and you say, look, I can't be part of carrying this out. And the reality is, in the situation where we need to create an atmosphere of political stability in this area of the world, you cannot do that from ships and planes. At some point, you have to have armed forces on the ground to create an atmosphere of stability that is aided by the ships and the planes. But otherwise, we're just going to, stir things up and go away. And, my cousin, H.R. McMaster, second cousin, has a terrific insight into this, and his videos are available all over the internet. But these guys understand, these generals understand, war is about politics first.
Yeah, and Scott, I have to thank you. I thought over the course of this, the last couple of days, putting this three-parter together, that I'd looked at it from every angle. But having a general resign over principle is one that did not occur to me. And thanks, it's why I love doing this show. All right, folks, I want to go back for a moment to President Truman and General MacArthur. I mentioned him just a minute ago. During the Korean War, MacArthur was absolutely right that the fastest way to victory was to bomb the bridges on the Yalu River and the Chinese forces on the other side of the Yalu River in China. Now, strictly as a matter of military operations, I should say. But as a matter of precedent and of constitutional order, Truman was absolutely correct in firing MacArthur for trying to use his position to undercut the orders of his commander-in-chief. But in today's Washington, there's no telling where the buck stops as it careens from the Resolute Desk, which seems ironically named, to the Pentagon, to Foggy Bottom, to Capitol Hill, and back again and again and again. For Scott Ott and Bill Whittle, I'm Steve Green. Stand by for part 2 coming up.